All right, YouTube, it's that time at last. Super Tuesday predictions. I've got the polls up. I'm going to be going through them, doing a little bit of analysis. But first, there is big news. Actually, there's fairly big news on both sides of the aisle, so-called. The old false dichotomy between the so-called left and the so-called right. Really, most of them are just a bunch of friggin' statists anyway, but there is big news there. The VP of the DNC, that is the vice president of the whole shebang on the Democratic side, has quit her job and endorsed Bernie Sanders. Now, Sanders has narrowed nationally the gap between himself and Clinton significantly. The problem for him on Super Tuesday is that most of those southern states, he's, 10, 20, 30 points behind. He's obviously going to win Vermont. He has a fighting chance in a few of these other states. Otherwise, not a whole lot going on for Sanders on Super Tuesday. The problem is it may be too little too late. That is the endorsement of the DNC's own sort of vice presidential chair, the narrowing of the polls, and also he just got crushed in South Carolina. 75, I think it was like 74 to 26 or something like that, some insane number. It made his victory in New Hampshire look weak by comparison. So that's the news on the Democratic side. We'll see if that actually causes any sort of real effect. I'm still expecting Hillary to be the nominee because remember, his voting bloc is younger. Younger people vote at lower levels. Most of the over 35s, you say socialism, they still think of Mao or Stalin or something. Partially deservedly, I happen to deeply oppose socialism, including democratic socialism myself, but it's not Stalinism, let's face it. However, he's at a severe disadvantage. His voters don't come out at a high enough proportion. He is still about 5 points behind her nationally, even though it's significantly more narrow than it was. A lot of these Super Tuesday states are in the Deep South. So he's at a big disadvantage right now. On the GOP side, most of the news really has to do with none other than Donald Trump. There's really not a whole lot else to talk about. People in the media are pretending that Cruz might lose Texas and get ass blasted. However, most of the reliable polling from the last week shows him about 10 points ahead in Texas now. I expect it to be more narrow than that in the final result. He's certainly not going to get the 50% he needs to get all of the delegates in Texas. It will be split, which really hurts Ted Cruz because that 172, I believe, delegates would have been a real prize, and it would have helped him. At the very least, if there was a brokered convention, which I'm not expecting, it would give him some leverage. But really, he's going to end up having basically a three-way split between those delegates and not really getting much out of it that Trump and Rubio aren't getting. It's going to make him look weak, by the way, if he doesn't win by a substantial margin. Because Trump will come out and say, I won over Cruz in 3 different states by a larger margin than he beat me in his own home state. He's weak. He's pathetic. That's exactly what he'll say. And I expect that 8 to 10 or whatever point gap does exist. I don't believe the 2 outlier polls that show a statistical tie. One of them has too small a sample size. And the other one was some time ago when there might have been a tie going on. I choose to believe the 2 more reliable recent polls showing Cruz ahead by 8 to 10. However, he will probably only win the state by maybe 5 points or so. After that, it gets really bleak going forward, looking at the rest of the race. What other news do we have? Rubio still is not reliably leading in any state. I believe I'll go through the polls here. There's other news to talk about first. Jeff Sessions, Chris Christie, Jan Brewer. You probably know these names if you're up to date on politics. All 3 have now endorsed Donald Trump in the last 48 hours. What happened was after the debate, which I didn't think Trump did badly, Trump's supporters probably didn't care. And even some of the pundits, like even Bill O'Reilly said, Trump clearly won the debate. Yeah, but not by as wide a margin as some of the last ones. Rubio did come out attacking him. I think to anyone that's not really a Rubio supporter or sort of ambivalent towards Rubio, that is, the majority of the GOP can't stand Rubio. They see him as a whiny little bitch. They saw an unhinged Rubio as opposed to Trump, who was obviously unhinged at the beginning. They expect Trump to talk over people and insult them. They don't expect Rubio to do that. Rubio has attempted to polish his look into the nice, squeaky clean, 40-something, middle-aged, suave dude. For him to then go on a complete blitzkrieg during the debate, and not only against Trump but against Cruz, really, it didn't sit right. Even myself watching. Now, I'm not like registered for Trump or registered for Rubio. I'm a libertarian. Looking at it, here's this dude who was rather quiet, really only attacked anyone when reacting to them attacking him in prior debates, all of a sudden going apeshit. It seemed abnormal. It also seemed planned. It didn't seem spontaneous. With Trump, you expect him to spontaneously insult the media, the audience, DC at large, the leaders of the GOP, Hillary Clinton, everyone else up on stage, people he used to work with. You never know what group he's going to insult. We sort of take it now as normal that that's what Donald Trump does. Rubio, however, until that debate, didn't do this. And unfortunately, what may have bolstered his support a little bit was completely wiped out in the news cycle by less than 24 hours later, Chris Christie, who, and I'll discuss the importance of this from a real perspective in a moment, endorsing him. Why is Chris Christie important? Number one, Alaska. Chris Christie was the front runner in Alaska for some time. This effectively takes a state that may have been on the table because it looked like Cruz was only 3 or 4 points behind Trump off the table. That's my Alaska at this point, I believe, will probably go Trump. Jeff Sessions. What's his importance? He's from Alabama. Alabama's a Super Tuesday state, too. This takes Alabama off the table. Now, Trump was already leading there by, I think, about 10 points. But that's one less state he has to really worry about. It's one less place he has to go to in depth in the coming 24-ish hours before really everything gets buckled down for Super Tuesday. It also is likely to increase his support elsewhere in the Deep South. Now, what do we know? Rubio fairly recently was the front runner in Arkansas, not by a huge margin. And in Tennessee, Trump was only ahead by a few points. I envision Trump gaining 2 or 3 points in both of these states, and now I think we can safely say Arkansas and Tennessee, which may have been competitive, are probably off the table. Jeff Sessions really scores it for him as far as any of these southern states go, even Oklahoma, where Carson was the front runner at one point. As far as, like I said, as far as Texas goes, I expect it to go to Cruz narrowly. Jan Brewer is popular in Arizona. Now, for somebody like me, it's the endorsement of Jan Brewer almost as a turnoff for a candidate. Because all I remember Jan Brewer for is her sheriff friend, not Arpaio, but the other local sheriff that she was speaking with for some time that liked her and supported her with all the controversy regarding immigrants there. I remember that specific individual saying you could tell who was an illegal immigrant by what they were wearing on their feet. Well, no, you fucking idiot, you can't. And it shows you're going to be judged to some degree by the company you keep. Jan Brewer, to me, is physically hideous. She looks to me like a vulture, a very cartoonish caricature. It must be from baking out in the sun too much. And I think it's begun to fry her brain. It's sort of like Sarah Palin's endorsement. Yes, major name, kind of celeb in certain circles. Ultimately, I think that Jeff Sessions' endorsement and Chris Christie's endorsement matter quite a bit, especially it's right before Super Tuesday. Jan Brewer, maybe in Arizona. Elsewhere, probably not so much. I envision Trump doing very well on Super Tuesday, and I think Hillary also is really going to seal the deal on the Democratic side. At this point, you see, why, for example, why do you think Jeff Sessions, rock-ribbed conservative, you might have assumed he would either go with the establishment and back Rubio or go with his hardcore conservative ways and back somebody like Ted Cruz. Why do you think he decided to back Trump right before Super Tuesday? The basically last round of polling in these states is in. Trump is already reliably ahead in virtually everything. Marco Rubio may not win a single state. He's possibly narrowly ahead in Minnesota. Other than that, nope. Sorry, he's in second, sometimes third place. He's in third in Texas. A slew of second place finishes giving you a second tier level of delegates. And in some states, Trump and or Cruz could win by a large enough margin not to have to share them anyway. You would think of Georgia. I believe if you get 50% in Georgia, you get all the delegates. Could be wrong. Someone from Georgia tell me. But I think Trump is pretty close to that mark. He's also fairly close to it in Massachusetts. I'm not sure how they award theirs. At this point, a lot of the more fringe, the people who aren't part of the really big money at the center of the Republican Party, the Boehners and so forth, or the McCains. Someone like Sessions, who's a little bit outside of the core of the party. Again, like Ted Cruz, he's not an outsider, but he's part of the fringe of the insiders, of the establishment. They're going to start flocking to Trump and bolstering his support even more. Because they realize, after Super Tuesday, if Rubio doesn't win any state, which is certainly within the realm of possibility, at best he gets one, maybe two states. Pulls off somehow a win in Arkansas and then grabs Minnesota. But Trump is virtually guaranteed at least 7 of those states. He's going to get more delegates than his two opponents combined. Cruz may not win in his home state. Rubio is still a good 15 points behind in his home state that's not long from now is going up to vote. Trump is only going to increase his support. Again, the low ceiling argument is a mythology. We know this because in some of these states, Trump is approaching 50% support. The fact that he has lacked momentum in some of the evangelical states in a crowded race no longer even matters because Cruz, after barely eking out a win in Texas and losing every other state, is not going to do well. A lot of his supporters are going to abandon him. Now, if Carson's still in the race, a few of them might throw a Hail Mary and go for him. A few of them will stand on insider principle and go for Rubio. The bulk of those people are going to end up becoming Trump fans. Not hardened support, because they didn't originally support Trump. The 33, the roughly 1/3 of the Republican Party that has consistently backed Trump, that's his hardened floor. His floor is higher than anybody else's ceiling so far. He has a high floor, not a low ceiling, in other words. We saw that in Nevada. We're about to see it especially in Massachusetts and Georgia. I think Trump is going to he might pull in 10 points above where he's polling at. And again, I believe under their rules can get all the delegates by doing so. I believe it's mostly proportional if your vote share is below 50%. That cracks his ceiling wide open. But let's get to the polls here and ask ourselves what's likely to happen. Now, in a few states, we lack good polling. So this is just, going by the polls that are available. And I'll throw in a few tidbits of wisdom in the states where it's not available, because it certainly isn't a few of these. Virginia, the last 3 polls show Trump up by 13, 14, and 23 points respectively. That's in the last few days. I wonder who's going to win Virginia. Yeah, I think it's probably going to be Trump. Meanwhile, Rubio and Cruz are basically tied. I think Rubio's pulled slightly ahead, but in the long run, it might not even matter. Texas, the last 3 polls, Cruz up by 11, 13, 15, 1.8 points, and then a tie up by 12. I'm going to assume that the 2 showing a statistical tie are outliers, and thus Cruz is up by maybe 10 or 11 points. Again, though, the endorsement of Sessions might improve Trump's numbers by a point or 2. His independent supporters that don't often take part in these polls, which in many cases target just Republicans, are going to pour out for him. He might get a couple points from that. At the end of the night, I do not expect Cruz to win Texas by more than 10 points. 5 is probably closer to the real number. He's going to look very vulnerable when he comes in well below his polling level there. Because it's clear he doesn't have a lot of hardened support in his home state. It's really rather funny. Georgia, let's see, we got 4 recent polls. Trump up respectively by 11, 7, 26, or 12 points. The 26 may be a little bit of an outlier, but let's just look at the numbers. He's up by double digits in 3 of them. But even if he wins by 7 points, it doesn't even really matter at this point. A lot of that is probably undecided voters, so he's probably got Georgia. Massachusetts, 3 recent polls, he's up by more than 20 points in each of them. He's got Massachusetts, he doesn't have any competition, especially now with Christie on board, so... yeah, Massachusetts, you can already call the race. They're going to vote for Trump. Oklahoma, and probably by 50 or more percent, which is the funny part. Oklahoma, Trump up by 7, 8, and 5 points. Sorry, the 7 is the average. 8 and 5 points, respectively. One of these is recent. It shows he's actually rising there. Cruz is in second, like he is in a few of these states. Probably going to go for Trump. Again, Sessions matters here. It's part of the South. It may be on the fringe of the South like Tennessee, but it's still there. Alabama. This is the one that Jeff Sessions has the most effect upon. Trump is up by 13 and 17 in these two polls. That'll probably jump to 20 with Sessions jumping on board. That could get him above 50%. It could give him all of the delegates there, and there's 50 delegates in the state of Alabama. That would be a nice win for him. Tennessee, the last 3 polls, Trump ahead by 18, 4, and 20. But only one of these polls is recent. There's literally only one recent poll. Now, if you only have one poll conducted in the last fucking month, you can't read into it too much. Ultimately, it could be an outlier. Trump could actually be down by 20 points. It's not likely. It's most likely, if you look at the polling, he's probably going to win the state by double digits. But keep that in mind. It's less sure than a place like Alabama or a place like Texas, where you have half a dozen polls in the last week. You can get a much better estimate of what's going to happen if you have more polls, especially with better sample sizes. Arkansas. Depending on which poll you look at, Trump up by 5 or Cruz up by 4. Oh, but the last poll conducted there was at the beginning of February. See, the problem is that was before Trump won 2 of the states that he won. Actually, I think that might be before New Hampshire voted. I don't think so. I think that was between New Hampshire and South Carolina, if I remember correctly. But keep in mind, he's won 2 states since then, and Cruz has declined somewhat since that point and underperformed, especially in South Carolina. This could weaken his support, and as part of the South, Sessions coming in again matters. Could give him Arkansas. I think there's a better than 50-50 chance that the most recent poll there is utterly wrong, that Cruz is not ahead, and that at the end of the night, Trump will eke out a win over him there. They'll be sharing the delegates, but at the same time, Trump gets to declare victory in yet another state. Vermont, there's one poll. Trump ahead by 15. Yeah, he's going to win Vermont. That's my state. I will be primarying for Trump. We have an open primary. I just go, tell him which paper I want, Republican or Democrat, and I fill it out and leave. That's what the Vermont primary is like. Sanders is up 80-20 in this state. I don't have to vote for Sanders because it doesn't matter what kind of turnout there is. I mean, 100,000 people would have to suddenly come down with dengue fever in order for Sanders not to pull off a win here. So it'd be useless for me to vote for him. Like I said, I support the Libertarian Party for the general election. But Trump is what the GOP deserves in more ways than one. He is now, oddly enough, the most sensible candidate left in the race now that Rand is gone. He will rip apart many of these sort of evangelocon retards that really ruined the GOP. The GOP could at least be a real conservative party. It wouldn't be a libertarian party or even a paleo-conservative party, which would be better, but an actual conservative party, even with nativistic belief systems going to and fro within it, is better than the neocon party that it is now. Setting it back 20 or 30 years would improve the GOP substantially, and he might go further. For all I know, he's a closeted libertarian or an ANCAP or something. I don't fucking care. Trump is what the people like Boehner and Romney and Karl Rove and the Koch brothers deserve, because he doesn't want their money. He's going to tell them to shove it, and he'll probably go after Citizens United and rip the whole scheme apart. He'll be sparring with the DNC as well while he tries to do this, but it's Trump. He could pull it off. I don't think anybody else could. Minnesota. Oh, I hate the Minnesota polls. Oh, how I fucking hate them. See, there are 3 polls listed here. One of them so old it shows Walker ahead. It came out August of last year. Then you have one from November showing Trump up by 7, and then one from January with Rubio up by 2 points. I'd say there's about a 50-50 chance that Rubio is narrowly ahead. But on the same token, Trump could be narrowly ahead. Or he could be ahead by 20 points. We have no way of knowing because we don't have any recent polling. It's been over a month since they've conducted a poll in one of the most important Super Tuesday states. I don't understand why. I don't pretend to care why. But unfortunately makes it impossible to guess who's actually going to win. Of all the states, this is the one that Trump is most likely to lose other than Texas. Really, those are the only 2 states where there's even perhaps a slightly better than 50-50 chance that he will. I think Samoa's are also up, and I think Trump's leading in Samoa, which is funny as fuck. Colorado. Now, Colorado, there's only one poll here, and that's for a reason. The way Colorado does it, for some reason, I don't quite understand it. They let their delegates not actually pledge to anyone and just sort of show up at the convention and vote for whoever they want to or something. Or maybe they all support the winner. I don't know how Colorado rolls. But there's only one poll here. It's so old Carson's up by 6 points. I think that's probably fictional at this point. But let's just give this state to Carson and be nice. Carson wins Colorado. Yay. In real news, I expect Trump will probably win it. Partially because of marijuana. He's the only person in the GOP who has even come out to support medical marijuana, let alone 420 legalize it. Alaska. This is where Christie comes in. In the last poll, and the only poll conducted in the last 5 months, Trump was up by 4 points. Cruz had led for some time there, but Christie was once the front runner there in one of these polls, and he was barely behind, by the way, Cruz for most of that time. In most of these polls, Christie's in like 2nd or 3rd place. He obviously had a long-lived amount of support in the state of Alaska. As such, I have the belief that Trump will probably win the state, partially because Christie endorsed him. Christie may be the capstone of Alaska in the same way that Sessions holds off Rubio's possible win in Arkansas, denigrates Cruz at the same time, makes sure that Alabama, all of its delegates likely go to Trump, while holding these other candidates off elsewhere potentially as well into the March 14th states. But ultimately, when I look at this, look at the states that are up and the polling there, and I look at what has happened recently in the race, I have no reason to believe that Trump won't win most, possibly all of these states. I think Texas, he's got less than a 50-50 shot. Polling has consistently put Cruz up. I doubt Trump can get an extra 10 points to supplant Ted Cruz. But at the same time, Cruz doesn't really have a major victory. He can't claim all the delegates like Trump did in South Carolina. He's likely to get about 1/3 of the delegates from his own home state with an underwhelming showing. The fact that he's lost control of evangelicals and they may not come out for him in high numbers may put it even closer. What happens if Trump wins by 1 vote? Can you imagine the uproar? But no, I expect Trump will lose Texas to Cruz, but it'll be split delegates. And I'd say there's a 50-50 chance that Rubio is still in the lead in Minnesota, but again, there's no way to tell. Rubio, though, is out if he doesn't win a state on Super Tuesday, because there are no longer enough states left for him to build up the kind of delegates he needs to take on someone who is likely to surge ahead by an extra 5 to 10 points nationally simply by winning so much on Super Tuesday. How can people who back a multi-tens of millions of dollar establishment centrist corporate candidate like Rubio, how can they justify continuing to support him when it's clear he hasn't won a state? He's had disappointing performances all the way through. Now all of a sudden you've got, I think, 15 total states, if you include Samoa, I believe, and of course the first 4 states. You've got about 15 states that have had results come in. Rubio hasn't won any of them. How is he still viable? And Cruz, by the way, losing all the deep South states, as he's very likely to do, and barely holding on to his home state, means he's got 2 states that he won. One of them was the first state in that consistently chooses people other than the nominee back when he controlled the evangelicals. The other's his home state. That's not much of a victory. It's better than Rubio, but then again, Ted Cruz is likely to come in third in most of these states. Rubio will at least get more delegates overall because he'll have, in some of these states, a fairly close second place finish. Not as close in some states as others. But Ted Cruz is going to come in third in most of these states, honestly. And even in some of the southern states, Rubio's ahead of Cruz. I don't see personally a way forward for either of them after Super Tuesday, if my prediction is true. My prediction would be Virginia for Trump, Massachusetts, Alabama, Oklahoma, Georgia. Those 5 states are all definite Trump states. Really, in fact, they're all basically Trump states other than possibly Minnesota and probably Texas. And Texas gets a split delegate result. As for Kasich, he's obviously not going to win a single state. He probably won't finish in the top 3 in any of these states. How does he have a way forward? He's waiting for Ohio. That's quite a ways down the road. He's got to keep the fundraising up to actually get there. Ben Carson, there's now reason to believe that Carson's entire campaign is a little more than a farce to sell books. He's raised many tens of millions of dollars somehow, and does not appear to have actually done much in the way of campaigning other than he shows up at the debates and falls asleep. I'm suspicious of Ben Carson. Unfortunately for Cruz, at this point, with evangelicals abandoning him, if Carson were to drop out, Trump would probably absorb his support too. There's no way forward for Ted Cruz. There's probably no way forward for Rubio. Think about it this way. The media will declare Rubio, to have been reborn as a strong candidate if he wins just 2 Super Tuesday states. If he wins just 2 states, Trump over there is winning 7 or 8 different races. Rubio wins 2, all of a sudden they'll declare him the born-again Messiah. That's how poorly he's doing. He's doing so poorly that to him, a victory would be winning 1 or 2 states. He may not win any. If he doesn't win any friggin' states, what the fuck's he supposed to do? Now, there's a reason apparently to believe now, due to leaked reports that I can't confirm and don't really give a shit about, that Romney might jump into the race to save the establishment if Rubio fails to win anything and slides into irrelevance. I choose to believe that would be, number one, a losing effort. It wouldn't go anywhere because Trump would just destroy him too. Number 2, I think at the end of the night, people are going to realize how much support Trump has in a lot of these areas, especially Deep South, Northeast certainly, into the Lakes region. I think they're going to realize in the GOP how much support he really has. They're going to resign themselves to him, and you won't hear a lot of the attacks that you've heard thus far, especially since people like Sessions are jumping on board with him. He's building a coalition. A lot of them are like state-level people like Palin. Yes, VP nominee, but ultimately, governor of Alaska is what she's best known for, that and Reality Star. Chris Christie, state level, he's a governor. You could see Carson, who's never been in politics, jump on board the Trump train. Kasich could drop out and endorse him. He's the wild governor card. He doesn't obviously like these 2 senators that he's having to deal with on the debate stage. He might go for Trump. There may be a reason why Trump constantly softballs both Kasich and Carson. He also, to some extent, softballed Christie. You may not realize it because all the media reported about was the few times they got into a verbal scuffle. But most of the time they left each other alone and were really focusing on the same people. You saw at the famous Christie debate, he attacked Rubio and drew him in and spent the whole debate bashing him. Trump was free to focus on Ted Cruz. Personally, I choose to believe there may have been some collusion. I think Christie knew he wasn't going to get in. I think he ran interference for Donald Trump. I think that was agreed upon before the debate took place. Not really a conspiracy theory so much as, hey, Trump's rich. He could obviously have paid Chris Christie $1 million just to run interference for a single fucking debate, drop out and endorse him should anything, right before Super Tuesday. So there. Those are my predictions for Super Tuesday. And on the Democratic side, which is far more boring, it's basically going to be Hillary Clinton beating Bernie Sanders over the head in state after state. He'll get Vermont. I think he's narrowly ahead in Massachusetts. Most of the other states are in the deep south. She's got those. She's got the minority vote completely stacked up. She's got the superdelegates stacked up. The DNC's still on her side, minus their VP. It's Hillary. She's going to be the nominee of the Democratic Party. Doesn't deserve it, but she'll be the nominee. That's about all. Peace out.